Hello, I thought I'd do a video just to show 3 cartridges that I've been using in my system over the course of around about 2 years now at different times. Having had HiFi, been interested in HiFi for many years, I've come to understand how components can change the sound that is actually being produced through the speakers. And my system is I guess quite unique really. People have got a similar system to mine, I'm sure, but I've got a modified Riga tone arm fitted to a Linsonic LP12 turntable. I used name amplification. I've got a Heed phono stage with currently I'm using ProAx speakers. So all those components have their own characteristics, and in their own way they help to influence the sound eventually produced through the speakers. And of course cables as well, and cables can change the sound of that you eventually hear. Stands as well. So and of course same can be said for cartridges, and I'm going to show 3 cartridges that I've used at different times over the last couple of years or so. I'll start with this one here. This is a Nagaoka MP11 Boron. It has a Boron cantilever. Now I bought this cartridge used, and what I found when I installed this cartridge onto my system, the mid-range was a very rich sounding mid-range, a real warmth to the sound. It was really nice to listen to. I really enjoyed having it in my system. The frequency, the higher frequency, was slightly sort of rolled off naturally, I think. And during the time I had this in my system, it seemed that I was buying a lot more jazz records, and for a year or so I think 90% of my vinyl record purchases would have been jazz. John Coltrane, Freddie Hubbard, Miles Davis. I bought a lot of jazz records during the time this was in my system. I don't know, maybe perhaps subconsciously I didn't realise it, but perhaps I was finding that maybe this cartridge was very good at playing that style, that type of music. In my system it seemed to be that way. Really good cartridge. The other bonus I found with this was how well it seemed to track some of my more worn records. I mean, I've got lots of records in my system here, and a lot of them have been bought at record fairs or second hand, and a small percentage of them are not of the best quality. There's scratches, or there's ticks and pops which I can hear coming through the speakers, and despite my best attempts to clean these records, you could still hear these sort of crackles and pops coming through the speakers. But on this cartridge it seemed to, it wasn't as audible that surface noise. It seemed to really sort of help to eliminate producing the surface noise, and therefore get at the music really. And it was a real bonus, I think, to have this in my system, also for the fact that it is of its ability to play those worn records without producing the the obvious crackles and pops that I was hearing before. So this cartridge is now of the older range of Nagaoka cartridges. The MP11 is now been replaced, I think, by the MP110. The MP110 doesn't have a boron cantilever. They are on the more expensive of range of Nagaoka cartridges now. But the MP110 come, you know, I think they retail at less than £100. So yeah, I enjoyed having this, and I will at some point return to having this in my system again at some point in the future, possibly. Moving on to the next cartridge I'd like to show. This is a Denon DL110. I've got the stylus guard on there. This is a high output moving coil cartridge. Just put the cartridge down there, get the box here instead. Here we go. Now I wanted to try a moving coil cartridge without having to spend too much money, and I came across this one. This was used, low hours, and I wanted to try and get an understanding of how a moving coil cartridge can sound in my system. This is a high output moving coil cartridge. I really enjoyed having this installed in my system, and it was in there for quite a few months. I will return to installing this at some point, probably. I say probably because you know, I do tend to change cartridges quite frequently. Sometimes, you know, I have one for like 5 months, 6 months, and then perhaps sometimes a year. So I don't know if and when it will happen, but I certainly intend reusing these cartridges again in my system. What I liked about this is it is very sort of even-handed across the frequency range. It wasn't sort of exaggerated at any point in the frequency range. It seemed to be quite balanced right the way through. The soundstage produced by this cartridge was quite impressive. It was quite wide, certainly wider than the Nagaoka MP11 Boron that I tried. And the Nagaoka MP11 Boron was narrower soundstage than this, but deep. This was wider, also had some depth to it as well, and it was, you know, like similar to a 3D effect sound in my system. Anyway, yeah, very nice cartridge, very smooth cartridge, and as I said, very balanced across all the frequency range. And yeah, we'll return at some point, hopefully, to reinstall this cartridge in my system. Certainly give me a little understanding of how moving coil can sound. Very, very smooth sound, I think, produced by this one in my system anyway. So yeah, enjoyed that. Moving on to the cartridge that I'm currently using. Cartridge I have installed there on the end of my tone arm. Currently I'm using this. It's an Audio-Technica AT440MLb. Now I wanted a cartridge that had a very fine stylus profile. Of the records that I have in my collection, there is a very small percentage, and I am talking very small percentage of records, which I find when I'm playing, as the actual arm gets the more towards the inner, to play the inner grooves of the record, there is a slight hardness to the sound. And you know, I'm talking about a very small percentage of records that I have. I think it's down to possibly the quality of the pressing, maybe the quality of the record, could be a number of things that could be contributing to that happening. So out of interest, I wanted to try a microline stylus then profile to see if it could actually accomplish playing the record without that hardness being heard. So I went for one of these. I bought this. This was around about £120, and I installed it. It was very easy, I found, to install into my system. And playing those records, which I found previously slightly difficult to play on the inner grooves, this seemed to sail through it without any problem. I thought that was very, very impressive for me to be able to see a cartridge being able to achieve that was I think quite impressive. So yeah, no problem in playing records, the more difficult records that I have. I think this is the best tracking cartridge that I've ever had in my system, in its ability to track records. I mean, in my system, it seems to be anyway. It seems to be really, really good. Of course, there's more to a cartridge than its ability to be able to track. It needs to sound really nice as well. And I am enjoying having this in my system. One thing I've noticed is its ability, I think, to be able to extract an extra layer of information from a record or from a recording that I may have not previously noticed. Now, I've got records here which, you know, I've been playing for many, many years, and so I thought I knew this music really well, knew these recordings extremely well. But on occasions I'm hearing sort of little characteristics of the recordings being sort of produced since I've had this cartridge in my system. For instance, backing vocals then, whereas I might have thought, oh, there's one backing vocalist on a particular track, well, I'm hearing that extra one or that extra two, or I'm hearing maybe an instrument being played in the background, or certain characteristic of the recording then, which wasn't previously completely obvious to me. Obviously it was there, but maybe I wasn't able to hear it as well. But this is revealing that information, that those characteristics a little bit more. So really enjoyable to listen to. I'm also finding that it's able to actually handle very fast passages or complex passages quite easily. Electronic music is, fiery fast sort of electronic music is of no problem at all with this particular cartridge. So yeah, it's really enjoying having this, you know, in my system. It's very, very, very impressive cartridge, I think, for what I paid for it. And indeed I will be keeping this in my system for a while. I think I've only had it I think for about 3-4 weeks now maybe. So anyway, those are my thoughts on how those cartridges are. I've been really impressed with all three in my system, and they're all, it's back to the point of what I was sort of saying near the beginning of the video, is, you know, components have their own way of influencing the sound that you eventually hear. You know, everything. Speakers, I've tried different speakers in my system as well, things do sound very, very different, and of course cartridges are the same. They can all, and I've learnt that how different things can sound. So it's quite an interesting part of the hobby for me, is to trying different components in my system. Anyway, thanks again for watching the video. Bye bye.